Good evening. Another edition of Upfront with Jessie Jackson. Very special guest tonight discussing the growth of the jail industrial complex. Prisons for profit, prisons for politics, prisons driven by something called race. What should we do about it? Something called pretrial detention. And then the judge, the sentences, and the crime and time correspond. A whole range. In many states, this is the #1 growth industry. In many parts of the South, now the number of people who have in fact been eliminated from the right to vote outnumber those. In 1965 in Alabama, there are now more black men disenfranchised than were disenfranchised in 1965. What does this mean? What can we do about it? Tonight I have some very able guests. Attorney Michael Seng, John Marshall Law School, Dr. Donna Simpson, a former high school superintendent, Attorney David Shapiro, MacArthur Justice Center, and Attorney Barbara Arnwine, Lawrence Committee on Civil Rights. Brad Bickerman talk about the size of the justice system, the size of the jail industrial complex, and what we can do about it. Be right back.
Please join Reverend Jessie Jackson every Sunday on his radio show, Keep Hope Alive. To listen live and for local times and stations, please go to keephopealiveradio.com.
Oh, high five somebody, say, yeah, we're about to get paid right now. All of the promises that God spoke over your life that's been held hostage, it's got to break in the name of Jesus. Look at your neighbor and say, I just need a prayer partner around me because we're about to chase some demons this morning. We're about to break some yokes this
Kind of learned a lesson that it might take more than just a person's anointing to keep him. It might require some prayer. And I don't care how anointed you are, you need people praying for you, pulling for you in your life. Are you hearing me? The TV preacher's not enough. You need someone you could call up on the phone and say, I'm in trouble. Can you help me? And you know that they're going to call in that name above every name and call out your name before God. It's very, very important that you have such relationship where people will go to God on your behalf.
And then wonder why I thought I'd be further than I am at the age. Let me tell you why you are not further. It is not the devil. It is not witches. It is not demons. And it's sure God ain't haters. You are not any further than where you are right now because you have never thrown your whole self at anything in your life. And you think greatness goes on sale.
Get ready, new psalmist. Get ready, new psalmist. Something great is getting ready to happen. Something marvelous is getting ready to happen in your life. In your life. Oh, can you feel it? Then grab the person beside you and tell him, if you stay close to me, the blessing on me is going to get on you.
Welcome back. Attorney Shapiro, a lot of references in the press these days to the prison population and jail population. There's a distinction, right?
There is, yes. The prison population and the jail population combined is over 2.2 million in the United States. That's more than any other country on earth, both per capita and in absolute terms. It's more than Russia. It's more than China. And that consists of jail detainees who are presumed innocent until proven guilty and who are pending trial, as well as prisoners who have been convicted.
How do you distinguish between those in jail and those in prison?
Well, the main distinction is that those who are in prison have been adjudicated of a crime. Those who are in jail are there pending a trial. They're only the only reason to hold someone in a jail, it's not to punish, it's not like a prison in that sense, it's merely to ensure that they don't go anywhere until their case is decided.
Barbara Arnwine, there's a growing number of people who are in jail, which becomes prison as they await the trial, called pre-trial detention.
Yes. And there's really a danger there, Reverend, because a lot of pretrial detainees lose their connections with their family. We still have a serious problem in this country that most people incarcerated are not represented by counsel. They're threatened while they're in the prison system, usually by other inmates and by prison officials, guards, etc., about the possibility of long sentences. So that results in over 90% of people pleading guilty when they're not. So many, when many aren't. So there's so many problems with the whole pretrial system. The longer you keep them in, the more dangerous.
Along the women would say, we'll take 4 and 4. They've been in pretrial 2 and 3 years.
Right.
If they plead guilty,
that's correct.
They get 8-year sentence,
that's
4
right.
years, and 4 years off. So it was language, 4 and 4. 8 years sentence for good, 4 years off for good behavior. It's going to become a culture.
Well, the other problem, Reverend, is look who's in prison now. I mean, the most explosive growth in prisons, immigrants. Absolutely the most incredible growth, the mentally disabled. The third big category, people of color. Those are the 3 dominating categories of people in prison. We are warehousing our people with mental disabilities because we fail to treat, we fail to provide as a civil society. We are building more and more prisons to hold immigrants, pending, quote, deportation proceedings, and we are just warehousing out of the job market people of color. Absolutely.
Donna Leaks. Donna Sims is our financier ally. Donna Leaks is our educator ally. So I don't want any confusion in your household. Donna Leaks. One of the concerns is the suspensions and expulsions drive this population. And so often within the schools, there are now police, but would be ordinarily would be a kind of a fracture between students becomes a jail arrest.
And what we find is that, especially in schools where there are a lot of children of color, you will have security officers who are actually police officers. And there could be what is deemed to be just sort of an altercation between young people where the police will come in, arrest, handcuff, and walk young people. And it puts you in the mindset that this is the expectation for especially our children of color. They are more highly expelled and suspended than any other population, and especially our boys. If they get into any kind of an altercation or there's any sort of a discussion that goes awry, immediately they're taken down. And many times people just don't understand that it was the adult behavior that contributed to that young person now being an altercation that now has expelled them from school, and now they're on the street. They don't have anything else to do. They're not involved in the education system. So what do you expect?
And a 10-day suspension is like kicked out of school. Well, you can't catch up on geometry and physics with 10 days out, 2 weeks.
With 10 days out of school, it is that's 2 weeks. And if you're in an 18-week semester, you're looking at 1/9 of the whole time. You're out. That's 10% of the time you're gone. So part of the whole issue with those 10-day suspensions is that there has to be a way for schools to either have a place for young people so that they're still being educated while we're trying to work with the behavioral issue. But at the same time, I go back to many times it's adult behavior. What I find is, and having been a superintendent, is that if there wasn't an adult who was where they were supposed to be, when they were supposed to be there, it creates situations for our young people.
Attorney Seng, it seems to overwhelm the public defender system, that there are just so many more people in the process than there are defenses. So most people are basically poor without legal representation.
You've hit the question on the head. There's a broad continuum here, and there's not one cause to this. The schools, a big problem. Not only do we have out-of-school suspension, but we have a lot of in-school suspension where students are put in a room, nothing to do, and sit there all day. Once persons are arrested, we have not invested enough money in the public defender system. We do not have enough public defenders. Most of them are very dedicated. They are trying their best, but they do not have the resources to represent people to the fullest.
And there's the range of infractions. They had the case, as you know, Dr. Attorney Shapiro, of Mayor Daley's nephew, who was found guilty of manslaughter. He's getting, what, like 30 days? And
60 days.
6 days in prison, and And probation.
Probation, and he has to pay a fine and restitution
for
to the victim's
manslaughter.
mother. Right.
And the others in jail, and in fact wouldn't put them in Cook County jail. So it was a risk to put them in there with so many black people.
Right.
Like one judge has said some woman was too beautiful to sentence. I mean, it gets so subjective, it gets ridiculous.
That's absolutely right, and even in the case of Mayor Daley's nephew, it wasn't until my colleagues Locke Bowman and Alexa Van Brunt spent years and years representing the mother of the victim, David Kochman, that even that small sentence was meted out. It required the appointment of a special prosecutor. It required years and years of effort, and it is remarkable what the disparity is between the sort of infractions that lead to incarceration for so many of the people who are in jail, predominantly minorities, people with lower socioeconomic resources. There's no question that it's a two-class system, and that if the law was applied impartially to everyone, the war on drugs and much of what goes on in criminal enforcement would end next week.
You know, Barbara, you hit on the mentally challenged people.
Yes.
At Cook County Jail, where there are 10,000 under one roof, largest university of its sort in the world, more than China and any other nation, really, Iran and so forth. The sheriff says about 4,500 are mentally challenged. They're heavy dosage of medicine every day.
Absolutely.
And they should be someplace in a treatment center as opposed to being in the prison system.
That's a real problem. I mean, that we are not dealing with that. In fact, when Principal Leaks was referring to the push-out problem that we see in so many school systems right now because of zero tolerance policies, one of the things that we've noticed, the Lawyers Committee is running a program in South Jersey covering Atlantic City and many other big areas where we are actually representing students who have been pushed out of school. And we've had a 100% success rate in getting them back into schools. What we're finding in almost 60% of those cases is that the students had some form of, program because of disabilities, educational disabilities, learning disabilities, etc., that weren't being attended to by the school system while they were there, and they were violating the IDEA and all kinds of other laws.
I what you're saying in terms of what you looked at, Dr. Leaks, is that a lot of unruly behavior are disturbed children. They're traumatized, and there is not the counselor, so it goes from disturbance and to jail as opposed to disturbance to counselor.
Well, yeah, and the thing that's really interesting is when you start to talk about those young people who are in jail now who are mentally disabled, at some point, you would expect that they would have been identified within the school system so that you know that they need support services outside and that if they have some infraction, it's potentially related to their disability. Be supported and treated before they even
the absence of counselors is a big factor in this. There's no cushion.
And what we do in our project.
No, I'm unruly because I got a tragic crisis at home.
Right. Well, are you unruly because you're not getting the education that you deserve in the way that you deserve it? And that's a big problem of the violation of these IEPs, individual, educational programs that are designed for students with developmental disabilities. So one of the problems that we see is that we've been able to get counsel from major law firms to come up and represent these students, and that's why we're getting them back into school. But guess who's telling us about the students? Parole officers, social workers, and teachers who are upset that they know that good students are being pushed.
We'll be right back and talk more about what is driving the growth of the young jail industrial complex population. Be right back in just a moment.
For nearly half a century, we've been fighting for workers' rights, equal high-quality public education, health care, livable wages, and fundamental civil and human rights for Americans and people the world over. We hope you've been encouraged. Please visit our website at www.upfront.org. RainbowPUSH.org. And as Reverend James Cleveland said, the push is on. There's work for us to do. Can we count on you? Please join PUSH today.
Jesus, oh God, stretch out your nail-scarred hand in the name of Jesus. We bind, we curse, we destroy, we annihilate premature death, you unclean spirit of suicide. The Lord rebuke you now in the name of Jesus. God, tonight, as we pray, we loose a lifeline to somebody tonight.
The Word Network Revival Series is back. Tune in February 19th through the 21st, 8 p.m. nightly for our Winter Revival. We'll be churching hard all night with great singing, preaching, and dynamic interviews. Special guests include Bishop Bluhm, Lexi, Pastor Paula, Sharona, Dr. Bryant, Dorinda, Prophet Hall, Isaac, Pastor Vernon, McKissick, Bishop Page, and more. It's the Winter Revival, February 19th through the 21st, 8 p.m. nightly, and it's only on the Word Network.
Whatever he did once, he'll do it again. Ain't no use of you being surprised. You get your neck stretched out like an ostrich, and you get your expectation up, because this too shall pass, and this too shall pass, and he getting ready to fix that, and this, and this, and this. It's already finished. It's already done. Get your shouting out the way right now. Get it out the way. Get it out the way.
Right? When do you pray? No, I'm sorry. When do you pray? Say it louder. Now. When do you pray? You pray now. But Pastor, when I prayed yesterday, it was now. When it was yesterday, it was now. When you pray later on today, it will be now. When you pray tomorrow, it'll be, okay, so when do you pray? Oh, well, since you pray now, when do you ask? Well, since you ask now, when do you believe you receive? Now.
Welcome back. Donna, when we toured the jail a few days ago, almost half the population is mentally challenged. And the sheriff's on a heavy dosage of medicine every day. He said they don't belong there at $50,000 each a year.
And if you think about it, like I said, those young people should have been identified when they were in school. There are systems of support. See, what we're not doing is we're not investing the monies that we need to be investing to support them while they are in school, identified as special education. What happens is there's this big pool of special education students, and we don't provide them with the specific individual supports that they need because we simply can't afford it. I mean, it's just, and instead of spending $50,000 on keeping them in jail, why would we spend $50,000 a year to provide them with the individualized support that they need? They need counselors, they need social workers, they need specialized staff to actually help them become productive citizens.
And Dr. Seng, often when they come out of that population, jail population, they emotionally never recover. They're traumatized in jail.
Oh,
That's
absolutely.
absolute. And they have no place to go many times. And we're seeing more restrictive housing laws, policies by landlords, policies by municipalities that discourage persons from returning to their communities, returning to their families. If they return, their families run the risk of being evicted from housing. So it's a never-ending process.
Jail becomes a homeless shelter.
It does.
A jail hotel.
And jails contribute to the problem of mental illness. I mean,
Yes.
how does the Cook County Jail and other prisons and jails where we're in Cook County, as was mentioned, half of the population, more than half, is mentally ill. They deal with it often through solitary confinement. And what does solitary confinement mean? It means you get locked up in your cell for 23 or more hours a day. You're socially isolated. We're not made to be socially isolated. Being cut off like that is non-touch torture. There's no other word for it. And it exacerbates the mental illness of people who are already mentally ill. It induces mental illness in people who are not already mentally ill. And that's why when I talk to people who have been in solitary confinement in the Cook County Jail, they talk about people in their units screaming into the night as they descend into psychosis. They talk about people throwing feces because of what solitary confinement does to them.
Then they're beaten.
And they're beaten too.
Through feces.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Bob, what struck me about when Jennifer Hudson's mother and brother were killed some time back.
Yes.
Oh, what a great tragedy that was here in Chicago. We had a prayer vigil in front of the house, my mother's house, and we were locking arms and praying and singing. I heard footsteps, and so about 50 youngsters were coming toward us. They had on T-shirts and they hats. They were obviously a little gang group. And so they lined up and they walked up. I didn't know quite what to expect. For some reason, I was not afraid. I just didn't know what to expect. So one of them said, Reverend, I need help. And I really need help. And he started crying. He's maybe about 15. Because he cried, the other stepped up. He's a real man. The real deal is I've been in the joint, and I came out of the joint and got no ID, ain't got no money, ain't got no job. He just went to run down no ID, no money, no job. And so as I embraced him, trying to figure out what to say, if he go down the street to the school, he gets 5 meals a day. And many of them go to school to eat and no place to stay. If he goes to jail, he gets 3 meals a day, 21 meals a week, warm in the wintertime, cool in the summertime. So him, jail becomes a hotel, becomes a homeless shelter. There's nothing, there's more infrastructure and activity supervised in the jail than in the neighborhood.
Well, you know, I mean, but we want to, you know, also talk about the price that you pay in jail. I mean, you know, one of the deteriorations and problems in African-American communities right now is the exportation of prison culture into our community culture and the problems that it creates around, you know, interactions, around community cohesiveness. There's a whole lot of problems. The disengagement of fathers and mothers from their children.
Even wearing the pants down when you expose your bottom.
Right.
Because in the prison, you don't have on television uniforms.
Listen, it's more than that.
And so when they put it on TV some years ago, that became the cultural thing.
Oh,
that's jail style.
And a lot of the language, a lot of the disrespect, etc., and a lot of the violence. You know, there's a new study out talking about post-traumatic stress syndrome in people who have been incarcerated. And so those are some of the, you know, the elements. So there's a price to pay for going to jail. The one thing that we haven't talked about is that all the rights that you lose, not only the, you know, post rights, but while you're in pretrial detention here in Illinois, they don't give you the right to vote. You while you're being held, and to my mind, of course, that's illegal in my mind. But you know, but there's a problem with your right to vote while you're being held in pretrial here in New York,
Shapiro,
here in Chicago.
I heard something about the speed of trial, and so much for 6 in Cook County Jail. I keep remembering that the other jails was the same or similar. 6 months or 6 years waiting for a trial.
That's absolutely
no lawyer, inadequate lawyer, and 2 minutes for the public defenders.
Absolutely right. We're talking about people who are innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
We're talking about people who have a right to their liberty. I mean, being in jail means you don't get to sit down to dinner with your family. It means you don't get to watch your kids grow up. For, as you said, it can be 6 years in the Cook County Jail. It means you lose your liberty, and liberty is just the freedom to make your life a life.
Well, what other country in the world has private prisons for profit?
No other country around the world has it on the scale that we do.
Private Correction Corporation of America on the stock exchange, right?
That's right.
Yes.
Yes. Billions and billions of dollars made every year.
Who else has it?
I believe that England has some, Australia and New Zealand have some, but nowhere is it as pronounced as in the United States, where roughly half of all immigration detainees are in private prisons, where there are approximately 150,000 individuals in private prisons.
You see them as a market.
It's absolutely a market. You mentioned they're on the stock exchange. When they publish their reports to the SEC, Corrections Corporation of America and GEO, the 2 largest private prison companies, they say, what are the risks? What are the risks to our industry and our profits? Leniency in sentencing, drug law reform. I mean, the writing's on the wall.
Attorney Seng, we found that 2 private equity firms make $1.5 billion a year off of collect telephone calls back home. If someone calls you from jail, you really can't say no. You feel guilty. If you can't say yes, often you can't afford it. So it puts the people on the outside, lock them into the system as well.
The whole thing is, from any sane point of view, it's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. It's costing money. And because there's money to be made here, as was stated there, the lobbying is intensive, and what we have to look at here, I think, is not only the harm to the people who are incarcerated, but to their families, to the victims who don't know what's going to happen, and to the community as a whole. And none of this makes any sense.
But the vendors, this is a big business outlet for the vendors, Shapiro.
Oh, they're absolutely.
I mean, the food vendors and all that, there's a lot of money to be made.
Right, and that's even aside from the traditional private prison industry, which means you manage the prison, the guards work for you. Everything that goes on in a prison is subject to privatization. It can mean the medical care, the mental health care. It can mean everything from the cafeteria to the toilet paper.
Barbara, what we found also, besides that kind of the money made off the deal, is the prison labor forces.
Yes.
Keep increasing. They're now competing with the regular labor force.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, making all kinds of goods. I mean, for a while, people thought that the only thing prisoners were making were license plates. Now they're making, items that we're buying out in the public, and they're competing with the
Target
private
and Walmart and
absolutely
everything from lingerie to retrofitting military outfits.
It's outrageous, and it's just exploitative too, because it's just another form of slavery. So slavery by another name, yet again. And I think that what we need to do is to support the movements that are beginning to grow around the country to, quote, decarcerate. These are movements that are demanding that their states stop spending all this money on prisons, that they start shutting down prisons, that they start changing the laws.
That's a hot potato, because here, when the government trying to close prisons, you put a 700 or 800 cell jail out in the middle of the country. They've lost their farm, and they have no industry. And now the former farmers become prison guards, and they can then buy a house and split up the lots. They get them a shopping center and get them a Walmart and a theater. They build a whole town around the jail, and people 300 and 400 miles from the jail, they have to travel back and forth. It becomes a whole industry. So the close down one is a big political deal.
Oh, not only that. I mean, we were just talking about that the other day about D.C. The whole exporting people out of their states to these prisons in other states where people are, then...
Arizona is in the prison business.
Disengaged from their counsel, disengaged from families. I mean, all of these are problems that we have to do. But one of the biggest things, Reverend, is that we got to stop the prison flow. That means we got to start decriminalizing a lot of things that we criminalize. We have to start giving citations instead of arrests. We got to stop prosecuting people. That's where the reform movement has to go.
But much of marijuana and crack is driving much of the population.
Oh, absolutely, yes. That's right.
Marijuana, yes.
And in order, and it's the only solution to our massive prison crisis is to reduce the number of people that we incarcerate. It's not going to be solved through privatization.
But we'll come right back. There were two teams in the Super Bowl, both from states where pot has been made legal. Be right back.
I think that says something right there.
Join Reverend Jessie Jackson Sr., along with many industry executives and elected officials, as they explore solutions for today's leading issues. To register, go to RainbowPUSH.org or call 773-FREEDOM.
The Word Network is your exclusive destination for the biggest and brightest names in gospel music. We have all the concerts, music videos, performances, and exclusive interviews you want to see, and more. Ty, Fred, Seth, Morton, Kiara, Jay, Murphy, Kirk, Lecrae, and more. We are the Word Network, and we are gospel music.
Saying they took a crown of thorns. Somebody said that was 72 thorns that were plaited and a crown was put on his head. Anything that's happening in your head, my God, it may be your trouble. It may be our trouble. It may be nose trouble. It may be a tumor on the brain. But they put a crown on his head to heal your headaches. You don't hear what I'm saying?
Yes, he has been good to me. Oh, my goodness. Of course, we go through things. We suffer trials, tribulations, but be of good cheer because the Lord has said, I have overcome the world. I have overcome them all. So whatever it is that you're going through today, you're dealing with, just have faith, stay steadfast, unmovable, and you're going to get through it. And I mean right through it. If you don't get over it, you're going to walk right through it.
Still gotta leap, still gotta dance. He took the shackles off of my feet so I can dance. He took the shackles off of my feet. You don't have to shout, I'll shout myself. You don't have to praise, I'll praise myself. You don't have to glory, I'll glory myself. All that men will praise God. Let me hear you give him a radical praise.
Thank you. We're being joined now by Gregory Koger, who's with Stop Mass Incarceration Network, was himself in prison for a substantial period of time, and Jonathan Jackson, who is our RainbowPUSH national spokesman. Barbara, you were mentioning the case a few minutes ago about just how many people are in prison that should not be there.
Right. I mean, you know, one of the most amazing things that's happening all around the country, you know, I am the vice chair of the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. And every week, you know, we're seeing exonerations, even in Texas. I mean, Texas is leading the country right now, number of exonerations. But think about it. Those are just the people on death row. Think about what it means for everybody throughout the prison population. If we're having so many people who are being convicted just because they're pleading, because they don't want these long sentences, they fear that they're going to be incarcerated, they don't have counsel, they fear that they're not going to have effective counsel, even if they're given, you know, a public defender. I mean, all of these problems that we're seeing is feeding the system.
Now, what about the Assistant Attorney General last week's statement?
So what, yes, that's really amazing. The Assistant Attorney General for, the Deputy Attorney General for the United States announced last week in a speech in New York City that there are over 8,800 people eligible for commutation of their sentences based on the new law having to do with unfair sentencing for, you know, crack, powder, cocaine, etc. And he announced that that unfortunately most of the people have no idea that they're eligible. Unfortunately, most of them have no counsel, and he was calling on the private bar to take on the project of helping to get these people representation so that they can get their sentences commuted. And that's sad.
John, you had said some time back that I think the president pardoned 8 to 10 people thereabout during the Christmas season. You said there were thousands more.
Right. The president has the sole and executive authority, power, and the responsibility to ensure justice. It's a executive and enforcement division, and the president has the power given to him to release people that are innocent, to hold up death row, to stop it, to actually commute sentences, as well as to free people. And since 2010, the laws were reversed on changing the crack cocaine to powder cocaine sentencing disparity. So it's the law. It was recognized as wrong. It was recognized as unfair. It was handcuffing judges that said these are some first-time offenders, nonviolent, and they should be
mandatory sentencing.
Correct. And so the judges were handcuffed, and then they overturned that law. And as a consequence, there are over 9,000 people, shall we say, Mrs. Arnwine, that are eligible to go free today. The president has the authority to set them free, and the Congress has already acted upon it. Why he doesn't do it is absolutely unconscionable. That we've let 9 people out on his last pardon. He did. And that was a great thing, but that's...
Do you think this information coming from the Department of Justice will reflect a bold change?
No, because they know it, and it's kind of a bit foolish and ludicrous to ask private sector to use more resources to try to free people that the Congress did its job and has already set free.
Gregory, you were in prison for how long?
11 years and 6 years straight in solitary confinement.
Just describe life in solitary confinement.
Well, it's very much designed to destroy people psychologically and intellectually and emotionally, you know, very scientifically designed. You're in a cell the size of
in the books in there?
Sometimes you get books, like when I was in Pontiac Correctional Center, they limited the number of books you could have. They would come in and shake down your cell and take away your books, throw them in the garbage. And I mean, it was very much, look, you can imagine being in a cell the size of a bathroom. I could literally reach out my arms and touch both walls. You're in that for a year, 10 years. There's guys in Pelican Bay who have been in, several of them, in solitary confinement for over a decade. You know, it's very hard to even begin to describe the level of isolation. I mean, what you were describing with the noise, the yelling, the screaming, people who are crying out for human contact and have no other way of relating because they are being put into conditions that are defined as torture under international law. Over 80,000 prisoners are in solitary confinement in the United States. It's completely illegal. And I thought that the panel really painted a picture here of the injustice of this. How many youth who have such potential to actually contribute to this world are being written off as worthless under this system.
What were you in jail for?
I was involved with a street organization. I got involved in a gang-related shooting, actually. And I went to jail when I was 17 years old. Was through my time in solitary confinement, including the work of revolutionary literature, including Revolution newspaper, that I actually began to transform myself and see that we could actually have a radically different world, that the world does not have to be like this. This is totally unnecessary for any of this to be happening.
Greg, how long were you in pretrial detention?
At that particular time, not that long, about 6 months, because this was in suburban.
How much time did you get?
They gave me 20 years.
20 years?
Yes.
Were you stayed 11?
Yes, it was long, convoluted. Some of this, laws were overturned, and it was a long appeal process. But I ultimately did 11 years, yes.
Shapiro, how does one address this issue of this huge number of people in this kind of mental torture for 10, 11 years?
In a way, there's a simple solution, and it's just to use solitary confinement less. If solitary confinement is justified at all, and I don't think it is only justified for an extremely, extremely narrow set of people who need to be isolated for some period of time. And when we're not talking years, we're talking, shorter periods of time in order to ensure prison security. But people are going to solitary confinement for all sorts of minor infractions. Like an officer says, go in your cell, and the prisoner doesn't immediately go into his cell. That can get you into solitary confinement. And once you're in solitary confinement, it's a downward spiral. It doesn't make people better behaved.
My wife was arrested and put in solitary confinement. What happened was she was in Puerto Rico protesting the Vieques naval occupation. And once she got in there, they wanted her to bend over and go up in her and violate her person. And she would not accept that treatment, and they put in solitary confinement because otherwise she would have to suit to the indignities. She took solitary confinement as the option. So it's not necessarily be violent.
No, and strip searches happen. It's a humiliating form of search. Happens all the time in prisons.
And invasive, not just strip.
Oh, invasive, yes.
Invasive.
And remember, we've just been watching a couple of cases now where people are calling it what it is, in many cases, rape. It's a form of rape, where guards are actually raping people, doing invasive searches for their own sexual, pleasures. And that's something that really is beginning to grab people's imagination, and people are beginning to really call it out for what it is.
This assistant at the Justice Department calling that the 8,800 should not be there?
Saying that they need to have their sentences commuted.
Well, do you think it's likely to happen? You work there.
Oh, absolutely. And the Lawyers Committee and others will make it happen. And we have to get that done. I mean, there's no doubt that we will, be part of the
How long do you think it might take?
How
long do you think it might take?
Oh, I mean, obviously, to organize it, it's going to take us about, anywhere from the next 3 months to a year to get all these things done, or more to get everyone processed. And remember, the biggest problem at the Department of Justice is the Pardons Department. And my view on it, and I've said it publicly, and I will continue to say it, is that the head of the Pardons Department needs to be fired. He is a civil servant, so they can't. But he has no business being in that building. They reject, it is outrageous, they reject almost 90% of everybody who applies for a pardon. They do not do their job. They're not, processing people. There are thousands of people still in the backlog for that division. That division needs to be totally and completely overhauled.
Jonathan, do you think this may be a crack? You got the pretrial detainees. You have the people in solitary confinement. You got the wrongfully convicted. You think this move made by the Department of Justice may be a breakthrough, possibly?
Well, they've announced the obvious. This is why the laws were changed by the Congress, and they can easily put together a mechanism to identify all of them and serve them up one time. This needs mass action. Going each individual case, they have the same case. You know what the problem is, and the law should apply to all of them. It's already been passed. Why it's not being done is like foot dragging to me.
And the president pardoned reliably every year on Thanksgiving a Thanksgiving turkey. I mean, every year, Republican, Democrat, like it's a joke.
And you if white. Usually it's a white turkey.
I mean, but there's a serious point here. If you can do it for a turkey, we're talking about thousands of people who are in prison and don't need to be there.
I mean, do you think something's likely to happen? Given the revelation, you think something's likely to happen?
I hope so. I'm confident that through the work of the Lawyers Committee and other organizations, it's going to happen.
But it's starting in the wrong direction.
Yes, I agree.
Literally in the time that it takes to have that joke by pardoning a turkey, you could have actually picked up the pen and done the justice of signing it for 9,000 people and being done with it.
We're going to come back and talk about the transition. When you come out of that situation, the transition back into society. Is there a job, a house, a transfer? What is that in the transition to engage in reconstruction as opposed to recidivism? Be right back in just a moment.
Holy, 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 are you Lord? Come on, somebody say it. Holy, 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 are you Lord?
The 9th chapter of the book of Matthew discusses the woman with an issue of blood who declared to herself that if she could but touch the hem of his garment, she would be made whole. And now, for a generous love gift, the Word Network would like to send you this beautiful prayer shawl today.
You know, this is sacred. The seed of the Lord is sacred. You pick up the phone and sow that 107 seed. Don't let the devil cheat you. Don't let him rob you. It ain't just money. It's a turnaround. Because you're going to sow a seed only because the Lord told me to tell you to do so. And then we're going to turn around when the time is right and the anointing have completed what he wants to do in these prayer shawls. We're going to turn around and sow a seed right back into you.
And it is the Word of God that activates eternity on the inside of you. And when you have the faith of God and speak the Word of God, that's not limited by time. You get to bring into existence that which is on the inside of you into time.
.730 a.m. on the Word Network.
That's why Jesus got excited, because he knew. He pointed her giving up because he knew she was about to be rich, because she was following the principles of God.
When you came from that place and you was the underdog and people was like, oh, you ain't going nowhere. You ain't gonna never be nobody. God ain't gonna use you. You don't have the qualification or the right look or the this or that. You should be like this, or you're not so proper or whatever. The hater, the love it, the underdog's on top.
Welcome back. Always the short stuff off camera. Barbara was saying the 8800 is tip of the iceberg.
Yes, because as many people don't know, there was a law introduced into Congress this past 2 weeks ago. That's the Smarter Sentencing Act. And
Smarter
Sentencing Act. And basically what that would do is it would make the Fair Sentencing Act retroactive because there are hundreds of thousands of people in prison who were sentenced when the crack and powder cocaine laws were unequal, who, if that law was applied, would also be eligible for these commutations.
It's retroactive, would be retroactive.
And that's what the law would do. It would make it retroactive. And that's a real big demand. Now, what happened is it came out of the Senate this week, but Senator Grassley added on a few more, mandatory minimum requirements that are, are restricted, but still he, came up with them and put them on the act. But it did come out of the Senate, so it's on its way to the House.
Shapiro, Lincoln wielded that pen to forgive a lot of those who engaged in treason in the Civil War. I mean, he used his pen to forgive those who engaged in trying to overthrow the government.
When President Lincoln pardoned people, and when he looked at pardon petitions, he really thought about who these people were as human beings. There was one individual who was tried for treason in the Civil War, and no one wrote a letter in on his behalf. And he says, well, I guess he doesn't have any friends. I'll be his friend. And I think that sort of compassion, that sort of empathy for the 2.2 million people who are in prisons, in jail, all of whom are human beings, is what
Do you think in this day's political divisiveness that one could let out 8,000 people even if they're innocent?
I absolutely, I think so. And here's
you think it ought to happen? You think it's likely to happen?
I think it's likely to happen, and frankly, I think that it is likely to go farther than that. And why is that? It's not just because people are concerned about the liberty that's being taken away. It's also because their level of incarceration is just destroying us economically.
And the cost of it.
Exactly.
Greg, when you got out, how did that let you know you were getting out? What happened?
I walked straight out of solitary confinement. I pushed my own property out in handcuffs and shackles and walked out, and I did have a family who came to pick me up.
So somebody called you. What happened? How did one morning somebody woke you up?
I knew my time was up. You know that your sentence is over with. They called me, let me straight out of solitary confinement, and I walked out into a world that I had not seen in over a decade. And
did you have any money?
I had something, whatever money I had left on my books, that's what I had when I got out. I don't know, it was $40 or $50.
What were you able to go to?
Fortunately, my family had a home that they allowed me to come to. A friend of mine who was in a cell next to me for almost 2 years, he had nowhere to go. He paroled to a homeless shelter. What is he going to do? And can I say one thing on this bigger question? Look, you were alive and a leader in the 1960s. Society is not going to change without there being a mass movement against mass incarceration. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I think that, yes, there are things happening legislatively, but unless we build a mass movement to actually challenge this and put forward very strongly that this is completely immoral, any society that does this to literally millions of people should not be allowed to continue.
Were you prepared for a job of any sort?
I was a jailhouse lawyer, which is another segment of people who are placed into solitary confinement, and I actually did work in a law office for several years.
Reason I raise that, Jonathan, is that often people get out of jail, pushed out, with no one to receive them, no family member to receive them, and then they don't have the ID. They could be literally arrested again for not having an ID, you know?
Absolutely.
Then they go someplace looking for a place to stay, a place to work, and because they've been in prison, cannot get a job, then what?
Right. Then, it's a 75% chance of recidivism. Right. If you've had a sex offender case and you're not registered and you're not checking in with the place, or if you're living near a school, you are reincarcerated. But you also have to look at the other side. This keeps an economy flowing. Who's incentivized by this? Prison guards. This means there's steady work for them. Towns and municipalities, this is a good deal for them on high levels of incarceration because they get their proportion of federal funding based upon their population, although those persons that are in the prison are considered local residents. On a 10-year...
You got that down right, Barbara? You go to given town and there's 10,000 people in prison.
Gerrymandering,
they're considered residents.
Right. It's outrageous.
But they can't vote.
But they can't vote.
So even if you've been sentenced to prison for 2 years, you're counted on the 10-year census number, not where you're returning to or where you came from, you're counted on, if you will, the books, the records of that local municipality. And so this is a big business. So there are these rules put in place. And it all sums up to me with the whole mockery that you put into perspective of the turkey pardon. There could be, that could be a serious moment to pardon Americans every year.
A serious moment.
That could be a serious moment as opposed to a mockery.
But don't they hide behind the Willa Horton case as just for justified fear, Barbara?
Well, I mean, you know, anytime you put a black face and stamp a black face on something called crime, people go hysteric. I mean, it's the way we condition Americans, and what we have to do is fight that conditioning. I mean, racism is just a reality when you talk about the criminal justice system. It's over-racialized from the policing to the prosecution to the sentencing. It's all racialized, and what we have to do is we got to fight it. 900,000 arrests every year in the United States for marijuana, simple marijuana possession. 3/4 African American. And just think about the criminalization that we're doing to people every single day, and the mental intimidation that happens from stop and frisk type policies and all of those other
policies. Can you imagine
policies.
a mayor of New York endorsing as legitimate stop and frisk?
Unbelievable.
And
4
using
million
race
people.
profiling as opposed to stop and educate, stop and employ, but stop and frisk. And 85% of the cases, they found absolutely nothing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was outrageous.
Harassment.
It was higher than 85%, Reverend. I mean, it was
Help me.
It was higher. I mean, it's just unbelievable the resources that were wasted. New York City was paying more money in a recent study, paying more money on incarcerating people than it was paying for education. You know, these are the movements that we got to start. I am solidly with my brother here, is that we must, you know, really amplify, magnify the whole fight against mass incarceration.
The point you make
It
there,
is the crime of the century.
the prison union now in California is the biggest union in the state. Bigger than Teamsters, bigger than Longshoremen, bigger than Teach Union. And they wield big power in the incarceration debate in California.
And the union in California, the prison guards, have even invested their pension dollars in private prisons. So you have to really appreciate the cynicism and the mockery that some people make out of this. And you can think of the scriptures that a governor would ask on a straw poll. Do you want Barabbas or do you want the Jesus? Either one. Who's more popular to you? Okay, well, take him, the murderer, understood, well known to be a murderer. Let him go. He was simply saying, I could care less about either one of them.
And this is the sickening part of this, Shapiro. I mean, we must now move in a very different way, legislatively, and act to make it happen, because people are being arrested who are innocent and held for years, and that is absolute anarchist terrorism.
It absolutely is. And one of the things that is shocking here in Chicago is that my colleagues at Northwestern have exonerated numerous people who were persecuted by and framed by the Chicago Police Department. Has anyone in the Chicago Police Department been disciplined for all of these wrongful convictions, ever? The answer is no. And there's also a broader issue here, you know, when it comes to making our prisons smaller, and that is that our prisons are themselves creating a public safety problem, given the level of people that were incarcerated.
Now, for example, they let those people go who are eligible to go. They let them loose on the streets without education, without the transition. They unleash another set of problems. And that's why the fear, who has the executive authority may not exercise it because of fear.
But that's part of the problem, is that people are released without skills and without counseling. That's a big part of the problem. Another part of the problem is that in many cases, going to prison makes it more likely, not less likely, that people are going to commit crimes. And it also makes it more likely that their children are going to commit crimes.
And it's also a failure of, you know, our civil society, because the statistics still hold that 80% of everyone in prison lacks a high school diploma. And that is an indicator of your it's a more of an indicator of your likelihood to be in prison than any other factor. And
what struck me last night, that was this big
race
prayer breakfast in Washington, and they left the guy there reading scripture and praying. We're on the vote to reduce food stamps. We're on the vote to increase prison population and cut educational budgets. I mean, what kind of prayer connections going on here?
It's a lack of understanding what true Christianity means. It's a lack of understanding what humanity means. It's a betrayal of the American people, and the American people have to demand better.
I want people to call me this week. Call me at RainbowPUSH, www.rainbowpush.org, and go to our prison the department as we begin to deal with your situations. And also, you might, on Twitter, if you will, at Rev J. Jackson, at Rev J. Jackson. We want you to follow us as we proceed with our work, as well as, if you like me, go to Reverend Jessie Jackson Senior on Facebook. We must talk to each other in a very direct way. Much of what we're talking about tonight, you'll not see in the daily newspaper. You'll get it from us on this show, Up Front with Jessie Jackson. Be right back in just a moment. Closing thoughts.
And one of the things that's important if we're going to pursue peace is self-discipline. We need to discipline, beloved, what we say. It's impossible to have peace if we're always talking. It's impossible to have peace if we don't still ourselves, because we're not going to be able to sense the Prince of Peace within us if we're always engaged talking and on the outside and being stimulated by circumstances.
On the Word Network.
If God be for you, who can be against you? And you're more than a conqueror, and you're blessed coming in and blessed going out. You walk into a room and demons walk backward. You walk into a room and sickness leaves. You walk into a room and fear leaves. You walk into a room and anxiety leaves. You walk into a room and demons shudder because of the power of God that is working inside of you and working inside of you.
On the Word Network.
And when you realize it's already in you, when you realize that and renew your mind to know you've got it. You've got the victory.
Lieutenant Shapiro, given this mammoth crisis, what shall we do?
Real simple. Just lock up less people and let out the ones who don't need to be there.
Gregory?
A mass movement against mass incarceration. I work with the Stop Mass Incarceration Network. We're building a national movement against this. We need to work with everyone. We have to work together to actually end this.
Attorney Bob Arnwine?
Need to join. People need to take individual responsibility. Join. Decarcerate, mass movement against imprisonment. And I want people to also push that at the local level, more citations, less convictions, less, decriminalize a whole lot of behavior that we criminalize now.
Jonathan?
Don't give up on your families.
Yes.
That these young men, young women, even if they have done wrong or even if they are innocent, if they've served their time, they need your love, they need your support. And for those on the outside, get involved, get engaged with the RainbowPUSH, with the Innocence Project.
Yes.
Get your church involved. Share your story, because too many people suffer in silence when it's a common and it's a mass problem.
I want to thank my panel tonight for this conversation. I want you to connect with our movement. We need you to help us. You go to we're trying to get 1 million people to join the 1 million member club at RainbowPUSH. Go to your phone right now and hit millionmember.rainbowpush.org and become one in a million. Also, you can follow us on Twitter at Rev J. Jackson, or you may follow us very well on Facebook to be our friend on Jessie L. Jackson, Reverend Jessie L. Jackson Senior, Facebook. It's the way of our connecting with each other. Too much of what you've heard tonight, you'll only hear here. We must make it a mass action to end mass incarceration and set the people free. Thank you very much, and talk with you next week. Barbara?